At 15:14 hours on September 4th, the Caribbean sky was a canvas of placid blue and scattered white. Then, two daggers of gray metal tore through a cloud deck at 5,000 feet. The lead Venezuelan F-16A, call sign Martillo, piloted by Captain Rojas, broke the afternoon silence. He was a man fighting a war with ghosts, flying a machine that belonged in a museum. He executed what fighter pilots call a hook attack, a maneuver as old as it was deadly. Rojas rolled his Viper inverted, the sun-drenched sea momentarily becoming his sky, and yanked his control stick back with a ferocity born of desperation. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. The airspeed indicator, an analog dial from 1983 with faded phosphorescent paint, spun past 550 knots as he drove the screaming jet toward the stern of the USS Jason Dunham. His wingman, Lieutenant Diaz, call sign Sombra, broke hard left, a shadow skimming the waves, his dive intended to split the destroyer's defensive focus. 2 targets, 2 vectors, 1 ship. It was a classic bracket attack, textbook perfect for 1986. But this wasn't 1986, and the Dunham was not the HMS Sheffield. Below, the Aegis destroyer was not an inanimate vessel. It was a sentient predator. Its integrated systems, a network of silicon and steel, snapped to attention with cold, silent efficiency. On the ship's fore and aft, 2 Phalanx CIWS mounts, affectionately nicknamed Sea Whiz, came alive. Their white domes, housing independent radar systems, swiveled with unnerving speed. The port mount locked onto Martillo, its gaze unflinching. The starboard mount found Sombra, tracking his sea-skimming profile against the radar clutter of the waves. The 6 barrels on each Gatling gun began their pre-spin, a low hum escalating into a terrifying whine, the sound of 4,500 rounds per minute preparing to shred the sky.
Inside the Combat Information Center, CIC, the air was cool and filled with the low hum of electronics. Fire control technicians watched as both failing systems achieved perfect firing solutions simultaneously. The ship's main SPY-1D radar wasn't just tracking the F-16s, it was performing a deep tissue biopsy. Each radar pulse, a ghost of electromagnetic energy, struck the aircraft 30 times per second, painting a picture so detailed it was like reading their maintenance logs. The system knew their speed, their altitude, their vector, and, through infinitesimal Doppler shifts, the strain on their aging airframes. Martillo pulled out of his dive at a gut-wrenching 500 feet, the afterburner a roaring plume of incandescent rage. His thumb, slick with sweat inside his flight glove, found the weapon selector. He chose the IM-9L Sidewinder. Inside the missile's nose, the infrared seeker head began its circular scan, a mechanical eye hunting for the specific heat signature of a jet engine, the 3 to 5 micron wavelength of a 1,000 degrees Celsius exhaust. His headset remained silent. No tone, no luck. The missile was a bloodhound searching for a wolf, completely blind to the 200 degrees Celsius 8 to 12 micron heat signature of the ship's stacks. It literally couldn't see the destroyer. Sombra leveled off at a breathtaking 50 feet. Salt spray ghosted across his canopy, and the roar of the ocean filled his ears. His radar altimeter, a finicky relic, shrieked intermittent warnings. The system was a known problem, prone to cutting out below 500 feet. The parts Venezuela needed to fix it were locked away behind an embargo, impossible to buy, steal, or replicate. He was flying on instinct and prayer. As he pulled up, his ANLR-69 radar warning receiver, RWR, screamed to life. His forward hemisphere lit up with threats, but the rear was a terrifying blind spot. The rear left antenna was a dead zone, its connections corroded by years of salt air and neglect. The rear right flickered erratically. He was half blind, flying into the teeth of a radar system that could burn through lead shielding.
This was the fundamental suicidal flaw in their plan. Attacking a modern Aegis destroyer in Block 15 F-16s was like trying to slay a dragon with a wooden sword. They had no targeting pods for laser-guided bombs, no GPS integration for JDAMs. Their 1980s-era mission computer couldn't even process the concept of GPS. They carried no AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, no HARM missiles to suppress the destroyer's radar. Their entire anti-ship arsenal consisted of cannons and heat-seeking missiles that were blind to ships. Martillo, undeterred, attempted to acquire the Dunham with his APG-66 radar for a gun run. The mechanically scanned array swept back and forth like a frustrated metronome, taking 3 agonizing seconds to paint a picture of the world ahead. When he switched from search to track mode, his situational awareness vanished. The radar could do one job or the other, but not both. Worse, at 200 feet, the sea clutter was overwhelming. Every wave crest appeared as a false target, a phantom mountain on his screen. The 9,000-ton destroyer flickered in and out of existence like a ghost ship. He wrestled with manual gain knobs, trying to find a steel warship in an ocean of radar noise, all while flying at 580 knots, just hundreds of feet from a watery grave. He aborted the run. The fuel gauge, assuming its sensors weren't lying again, read 4,200 pounds. 3 minutes in afterburner had incinerated 2,400 pounds of fuel. Sombra pulled alongside, holding up his fingers against the canopy. 5 fingers. Twice. 5,500 pounds. Without a Link 16 data link, they were reduced to the communication methods of World War II pilots. They split again for one last pass, a classic pincer. Martillo dove for the bow, Sombra for the stern. It was a textbook tactic to divide defensive fire. But the Aegis system didn't prioritize, it allocated. The Dunham could track and engage over 100 targets and direct weapons against 18 of them simultaneously. 2 aging F-16s were not a threat, they were a training exercise.
Then the Americans decided to play. A single switch was flipped in the CIC, and the ship's SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite began its silent symphony. The Venezuelan APG-66 radars, operating on a fixed 9.3 GHz frequency since the Reagan administration, were wide open. The jamming wasn't a brute force blast of noise. It was surgical, elegant, and utterly demoralizing. Martillo's radar screen dissolved into a kaleidoscope of digital lies. One destroyer became 3, then 5, then vanished entirely, replaced by a phantom aircraft carrier moving at impossible speeds. Sombra watched in disbelief as his display showed the Dunham split into 2 identical ships, both fleeing in opposite directions. Their sensors, their only eyes in the electronic world, had been turned against them. Martillo pressed his attack through the electronic chaos, diving from 3,000 feet. The F-16 shuddered, a deep, resonant vibration that was not aerodynamic. It was the groan of metal fatigue. 40 years of Venezuelan maintenance, a patchwork of hope, cannibalized parts, and J.B. Weld was reaching its limit. A sharp crack echoed from behind the cockpit. Probably non-critical, he told himself. Probably. As the 2 jets, fuel gauges now screaming for home, turned south, the Dunham's intelligence team cataloged everything. Every radar emission, every tactical misstep, every desperate maneuver. Tomorrow, President Maduro would send them back, his voice crackling with fury over the phone. He would demand they be more aggressive.
At 14:30 hours on September 5th, the same 2 pilots, their faces etched with exhaustion, strapped into the same 2 tired F-16s. The night had been a blur of debriefings and recriminations, of generals screaming at colonels who then screamed at them. The orders were simple and suicidal: force a reaction, get something for state television. The pre-flight checks were a farce. Martillo's inertial navigation system placed them 20 miles inland before they'd even left the tarmac, its gyros drifting from years of uncalibrated use. Sombra's RWR was now completely dead in 2 quadrants, and his artificial horizon would freeze for 2 or 3 seconds at a time, an eternity in a high-speed dive. They were flying museum pieces into a battle they had already lost. This time, they opted for the high-low split. As Martillo climbed through 10,000 feet, his engine choked. A violent bang erupted from the intake, a sound like a shotgun blast right behind his head. The F-100 PW-200 engine compressor had stalled. He instinctively pushed the nose down, easing the angle of attack, and the engine coughed back to life with a shudder that vibrated through his bones. The compressor blades, long past their 4,000-hour service life and likely riddled with microscopic fatigue cracks, could no longer handle aggressive maneuvering. He was flying a fighter that couldn't fight. This time, the Americans were waiting. An E-2D Hawkeye, circling at 30,000 feet, had detected their takeoff from 200 miles away. The Dunham's Spy-1D radar acquired them at 180 miles. A Virginia-class submarine, lurking silently below,
recorded their unencrypted VHF communications through a photonic mast. High above, an MQ-4C Triton drone streamed crystal-clear 4K infrared video of the entire scene to a secure conference room in the Pentagon, where admirals watched with professional detachment. The Venezuelan pilots were not combatants. They were specimens under a microscope.
Martillo rolled inverted at 12,000 feet, pulling into a dangerously steep 60-degree dive. Without a targeting pod, he aimed using the fixed reticle on his head-up display, a piece of technology from an era when phones still had cords. He was guessing, using Vietnam-era bombing tables he'd memorized, to aim imaginary bombs at a target that was being electronically moved around his screen by an invisible hand. Sombra, down on the deck, skimmed the waves again, his faulty altimeter a ticking time bomb. The SLQ-32 on the Dunham played with him, painting phantom missile launches on his RWR, making him jink and burn precious fuel for threats that didn't exist. At 3,000 feet, Martillo's eyes told him one thing, but his radar screamed another. The visual of the destroyer was a full 500 meters to the right of where his APG-66 insisted it was. He yanked the stick, pulling a brutal 5 Gs in a rolling correction. His G-suit, leaking air since 2019, failed to fully inflate. His vision narrowed to a gray tunnel as blood drained from his head. The overstressed airframe groaned, and a sound like tearing metal shrieked from the left wing root. Hydraulic pressure dropped 20%. He held on, fighting back the darkness, pulling out at 800 feet. At 1447, Sombra climbed for a final slashing attack. As he rolled in, the Dunham's forward Sea Whiz mount elevated its barrels. It wasn't to fire, but to make a statement. The barrels spun up to full speed. The buzzsaw whine traveling across the water, a clear, unmistakable message. The fire control radar locked him with a grip so tight it could calculate which rivet on his wing would fail first. Then the destroyer unleashed its most potent weapon. The SPY-1D radar switched from search to a focus track, pouring 6 megawatts of raw electromagnetic energy directly onto his F-16. Sombra's world exploded into a cacophony of alarms. His RWR shrieked a constant, piercing tone, unable to identify the source of the overwhelming energy. His artificial horizon tumbled uselessly. His compass spun like a roulette wheel. His fuel gauge flickered between empty and full. The sheer power being pumped into his aircraft overloaded its ancient, unshielded electronics. Induced currents surged through wiring, shorting out systems. He was flying an electronic ghost. He pulled out at 500 feet, the G-meter pegging at 7.5. His failing G-suit offered no protection. His vision tunneled, then went completely black. For 2 long seconds, he flew unconscious at over 400 knots, a mere 500 feet from the sea. The F-16's degraded analog flight computer, a ghost of its former self, barely kept the jet from spiraling into the water. He awoke with the taste of copper in his mouth, disoriented, the blue of the sea and sky a terrifying blur. At 1449, Martillo made one final, desperate run. He slammed the throttle into maximum afterburner. As he accelerated through 500 knots, the damaged compressor stalled again. This time, there was no recovery. The engine was dead. The F-16 yawed violently as asymmetric thrust vanished. He was now in a 40,000-pound glider, aimed at a warship with minutes of life left in the sky. On the Dunham, the tactical action officer watched the F-16's heat signature on a thermal display. The engine casing was glowing 200 degrees above its operational limits. The aircraft was literally cooking itself to death. The 2 F-16s, defeated and broken, formed up for the limping journey home. They had burned 14,000 pounds of their nation's monthly jet fuel allocation to accomplish nothing. As they crossed back into Venezuelan airspace, Martillo's engine finally seized completely. An eerie silence filled his cockpit. A master of his craft, even in a failing machine, he managed a flawless dead-stick landing at Barcelona Airport, the tires screeching in protest. Sombra landed moments later with 300 pounds of fuel remaining, less than 90 seconds before his own engine would have flamed out.
The Pentagon's response was quiet, swift, and overwhelming. The next day, 10 F-35A Lightning IIs from Hill Air Force Base landed in Puerto Rico.
Their deployment had been scheduled for months, but the timing was a stroke of geopolitical poetry. Against the Venezuelan F-16s, it was no longer a contest. It was a category error, like bringing a Formula One car to a race against a shopping cart with 2 missing wheels. The game was over before it had even begun.